If you show this sprite to any Marvel vs. Capcom 2 aficionado, they'll instantly recognize it as Sentinel. Now show them this one. That's Magneto, another one of the top tiers. And this guy? Well, that's Juggernaut, of course. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has been a staple of the FGC for 20 years now, but these sprites didn't come from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. They weren't even carryovers from Marvel vs. Capcom 1. These sprites go back even further than that. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, with its crazy large cast, fast-paced gameplay, and busted top tiers, may be the last game of classic Marvel vs., but it carries sprites all the way back from its progenitor. If you were to time travel back to 1994, you'll find the subject of today's video hot in arcades. X-Men, Children of the Atom. And if it's your first time seeing it, you're going to recognize many of the sprites from MVC2 because they're the same sprites. This game was their origin. X-Men Children of the Atom was not Capcom's first foray into fighting at all, but the concepts and ideas introduced here went on to become the foundation of the Capcom Vs series. COTA in particular was my first introduction in earnest to 2D fighting. I had played Mortal Kombat before then and was a huge fan, but Mortal Kombat has always occupied its own space due to its unique mechanics and block button. I really didn't get into Street Fighter, but this game with its colorful cast of characters, killer soundtrack, and big bombastic stages that progressed during the fight made it something I never forgot. Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter have differing characters, but they're all really just variations on the same concept. Ken and Ryu make up the basis of every Street Fighter 2 character if you think about it. What changes from character to character is the angle of the attacks, speed, and distance of the projectiles, and the angle their anti-air attacks work. Early MK games, conversely, give you a set of normals across a set of characters with unique special moves, but the commands for your normals are all the same. But seeing COTA for the first time was a game changer. Every character was unique in both stature and the things that they did. You had Shoto-like characters like Cyclops, sure, but what about the nimble Wolverine with his small hitbox, or the seemingly inhuman Omega Red? I didn't know anything about 2D fighters or X-Men lore for that matter, but boy was I about to learn.
Here comes a new challenger.
I can't say I'm the biggest fan of Street Fighter 2, or even Street Fighter as a series, to be honest, but that being said, I can appreciate the massive influence it's had on the gaming industry. If it weren't for Capcom's success with the versus fighting of Street Fighter 2, the Marvel license could have just been used to make platformers or generic beat-em-ups. Instead, they took the one-on-one fighting of the Street Fighter series, threw in crazy speed and X-Men characters, and started an entire series based on Marvel characters fighting Capcom characters. Thank goodness Street Fighter 1 wasn't the end of the series. Even when Street Fighter 2 was being pirated, it was influencing the industry. When Street Fighter 2 was in its prime, pirates were hacking the game to play it at high speed. Though Capcom was initially just focused on ending the pirates, in the process they realized that Davy Jones was onto something. Speeding up the game made it more fun, and because of this they started putting faster gameplay in their official releases. Don't believe it? Go try the original World Warrior, then play something like Street Fighter Alpha or Hyper Fighting. It's night and day difference when it comes to the speed. That decision fortunately carries over to Children of the Atom. Although there's no option to select a turbo mode or anything like that, the game does play much faster than its CPS1 contemporaries, and each character has high mobility thanks to dashes and aerial options, like air blocking and super jumps. Originally SF2 featured no meter, but when it eventually got one in later releases, it was really just for using super moves. In COTA though, it's not just that, but also for teching throws, and this in turn makes meter incredibly important, as we'll see later. The combo system itself is typical of Capcom for the era, featuring attacks that link into others and special attack canceling. Whereas combos had been an accidental creation in the original Street Fighter 2, this game openly encourages combos and tells players, combo is the key, right there in the intro. If you played another Capcom CPS2 fighter of the era, you'll be right at home here with the combo system, air blocking, super jumps, super meters, and so on and so forth. And while COTA may not be the origin of all these features, it's probably many people's first experience with them. COTA is also an early example of fighting games introducing mechanics to help new players. When you pick your character, you're given the option to select auto mode, which works kind of like Tekken's neutral guard. Your character will block attacks when you're not pressing buttons or moving, but as a drawback it also limits some of the actions of the character and makes you take chip damage from normal blocked attacks. I'm not really sure why either, because the game always disables it after winning one match, so it won't really matter in the long run. I can't imagine too many outranked casuals were going to be using auto block to beat high-level players. Capcom was apparently proud of it though, because the game's intro taunts it alongside the other features the game has. Maybe they felt like players intimidated by fighting games would see auto block as an option and think they had some sort of training wheels to help them out. I guess the slippery slope argument is a thing after all. Mid-90s Capcom puts auto block in X-Men COTA, and then 2 decades later we have Tekken 8 with Heat Burst and Rage Arts. Bottom line is, if it's 2024 and you've never played COTA, you need to check it out. Especially if you're a fan of the X-Men or just newer Marvel vs. fighters. Any fighter is only as good as its roster, and fortunately COTA has you covered. X-Men's COTA was released at the time when X-Men the Animated Series was still airing, and the game's big colorful sprites and roster assortment are obviously heavily influenced by it. Representing the X-Men in this game is Cyclops, Iceman, Psylocke, Storm, Colossus, and of course Wolverine. For the villains you got Omega Red, Silver Samurai, Spiral, a Sentinel unit, and then Juggernaut and Magneto serving as sub-boss and final boss respectively. And also Akuma is here too for some reason, but he's mostly just a secret thing. 99% of people who casually played this at the arcade would probably never have any clue he was there. He has no portrait or name in his life bar, which feels lazy on Capcom's part, but if you're the kind of player who managed to fight him in the arcade, you probably already knew who he was because the requirements to fight him are insane. He's also fully playable, but the code to do it is a pain, just like the one in SF2. It's okay though, it's all part of director Akira Nishitani's vision. Other than Akuma, whose sprite is pulled directly from Street Fighter II with no effort at all, the sprite work in this game has aged fantastically, and those sprites have put in some serious work for Capcom throughout the years, seeing reuse in Marvel Superheroes, X-Men vs Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, Marvel vs Capcom 2, and probably more. And while this game's designs were based off X-Men the Animated Series, you can tell the developers took a little liberty with the designs to give everybody some extra personality that reflected not only the show but also some needed Capcom flair. Cyclops and Wolverine both come to mind, with Cyclops' sprite facing the screen and breathing heavily in an exaggerated fashion to show off the sprite detail, and Wolverine just looking like somebody who's always ready for a scrap. The villains all look great too, with Capcom having added in all sorts of little touches to fill in detail and personality that was limited due to screen time in the show. Omega Red has a hunched over walking pose and almost slinks along the ground, and his stun pose makes it look almost like his bones are malleable as he falls over backwards and sways. The fairly obscure Spiral and Silver Samurai feel like they might as well have been in the show every week for all the love and attention to detail they got. And man, Juggernaut has always been big, but he's freaking massive in this game, and his sprite is always what I have in my head as the ideal Juggernaut design. The first time I made it to him in the arcade mode, I still remember the way it made me feel, seeing this previously unknown massive boss character pop up as my next opponent. There's just so many iconic designs in this game, it's no wonder the sprites held on for as long as they did. It's just a great roster, especially for fans of the original show or the X-Men in general. It's really the roster I compare other X-Men video games to this day. Hey, did you know you can mod the entire cast of this game into the original Marvel Ultimate Alliance? I highly recommend it. Silver Samurai is a blast to play in this engine. Like most of the early Capcom Marvel crossover games, the narrative is in kind of an odd place. There's character endings, but no real intro or other text scroll to set the stage for what's going on. This puts COTA in an odd sort of limbo, somewhere between a KOF Dream Match game and a spin-off work with a self-contained plot. Supposedly the game is based loosely on the comic book's Fatal Attraction storyline, but I've read maybe one full X-Men comic my whole life. I looked into it, and the whole deal with Magneto and Avalon, which serves as the backdrop of the game's final battle, does line up, but there's so many blanks it's really up to the player to decide the whole plot. Anyway, despite the lack of opening story crawl, there are character endings. Most of the early Capcom crossover games follow this format, probably to keep things kind of generic and non-committal, but at the same time reward players who do manage to finish the game in the arcade. So that being said, are the endings any good? Well, yeah, they're alright. Better than those in Superior Soldiers anyway. Most of the endings here take the here's what happened if your character won approach, although most of the X-Men's endings could be assumed to take place at the same time if anyone on their team defeated Magneto, since they all work together anyway. At least the character you fought Magneto with gets special screen time either way. Largely the artwork from these is just sprites from the game repurposed, although there is a smattering of ending exclusive sprites for other X-Men characters like Jean Grey, Forge, Professor X, and some of Magneto's acolytes. Most of these endings play out just like you'd expect, with evil characters doing evil things and the X-Men pledging to be stronger or just chilling out after the mission is over. Cut content in the game's files also hints that at one point certain characters like Colossus were going to be able to choose whether to join Magneto or not to affect the ending, but that was cut before the game's final release. And maybe that's for the best. I have a love-hate relationship with alternate endings and choices in arcade games. Replay value and all that is great, but 9 out of 10 times, even the most dedicated arcade goer is going to end up getting the bad ending and feel like they got bagged over the head and punched in the gut. Finishing this game for the casual or first time player will be pretty tough thanks to Magneto, so it's nice to have endings that are worth it. Good job, Capcom team. Except for Akuma's ending. What a lazy cop-out. One thing you never get tired of seeing is the passion from hardcore fans of these old fighting games. Go to the Discord of an old fighter like COTA. Could be Duraku Tenchi, Dan Kuga, or even Jackie Chan Fist of Fire.
I'm Jackie Chan. This is my game.
No.
Drop a question. I bet you'll get an answer within a few minutes or less. Going into this review, I didn't know anything about high-level Children of the Atom. I had heard there were infinite combos, but that was about it. So I decided to pop in and ask them about playing the game at a high level, and man, let me tell you, these guys love some COTA. I asked some general questions in the general Discord, and then asked for volunteers to DM some more in-depth questions too, and I don't think I received anything smaller than a novella from any of the respondents. Knowing that infinite combos were rampant, I expected to hear that the optimal strategy was turtling or a bum rush to get the first hit, but I was really surprised by what I found. This is one of the questions I posed to respondents. COTA has a lot of infinites. Do you feel that most matches are about who can infinite first, or is there a deeper meta? What keeps the game fresh? The answer may surprise you. Pretty much everyone I asked always brought up the same thing: the throw meta. You see, in COTA you can't tech a throw unless you have 50% meter, and much of the cast can force the opponent into throw loops, resulting in high damage or death due to the way throw recovery works. COTA characters also fall into two groups when it comes to throws: safe fallers and counter throwers. So depending on the characters being played and their options, a metagame is played between the two players on how best to survive the situation. To quote Zambrano from the COTA Discord, infinites are more likely to occur when the opponent has meter, so you have to weigh the risk of escaping or countering the throw versus being able to execute a long infinite combo for a little return on the damage. The scaling in this game is very harsh. It just goes to show that you don't know a game by watching it. You have to play it. I'm sure lots of people have seen high-level COTA footage and been turned off by the infinites, but below the surface there's more nuance than that. Most players did tell me that the infinites were a problem, but the diversity of character playstyles and the way that each character sets up their nastiest tech was what kept the game from getting stale despite the possibility for one-touch rounds. I also asked COTA players who they considered their mains, and I got everything from Colossus to Psylocke and even a Spiral user despite her being considered the bottom of the tier pool, except for Silver Samurai of course. Speaking of character diversity, another thing that's extremely cool is that the COTA community currently allows the sub-boss character Juggernaut to be used in competitive play. How in the world did that happen, you ask? It starts with a boss hack, as you might expect. The boss hack we're talking about makes Magneto and Juggernaut playable, as well as adds Akuma to the select screen, able to be selected without a pesky Capcom-style secret character select method. So sort of like how Juggernaut hack for UMK3 is beloved because it removes the need for the human smoke code. But there's also a matter of balance in this boss hack, oddly enough. Usually when it comes to fighting games, later patches are usually better for the overall health of the game, but in COTA's case, later ROM set updates made by Capcom made Silver Samurai and Storm weaker, but they didn't really need to be nerfed from where they were. The ROM hacker chose to use the JP 2.0 ROM of COTA rather than the later 3.0 update, and since the community liked that version of the characters better, everything just kind of fell into place. And Juggernaut, despite being a boss character and super strong, is still weaker than the top tiers in the game. So, in the interest of giving the game more of what it's good at, character diversity, they opted to allow Juggernaut as playable and tournament viable for the time being. Magneto, unfortunately, is still banned, being absolutely totally busted to the point of being able to turn himself invisible, crash the game, and spam unblockable containment moves all over the screen. He also auto-generates meters, so there's that too. Thanks Capcom, very cool. They probably wanted him to be able to handle the game's throw meta. I could go on here, but I think you get the picture. Lots of infinites, but also lots of ways to do it. A crazy throw meta game, fast-paced freestyle unhinged gameplay, and more make COTA something that's technically broken, but still very much worth playing to its competitors. And hey, if you love Marvel, this game is the granddaddy of the genre. How could you not want to experience the raw thrill of the Versus series' first incarnation, with its insane canceling, mad combos, and as one player put it, degenerate throw game? If you're looking to see it for yourself, the Discord members have an official channel on YouTube, and you can check out that channel for tournament footage and links to the Discord. I've also included them below for your viewing pleasure. Some players to look out for would be Big Nasty, Arctic, and Blaze Donuts, who more than one person told me was the greatest COTA player of all time. A fellow Omega Redmayne, by the way. Just saying. Before this, I've played all classic CPS2 Capcom Versus fighters, but never at high level. So I expected that they would all be very similar, but to my surprise, many players told me that COTA in practice played nothing like other CPS2 fighters because of how insane it was. To quote COTA Discord user JDES, even though it's technically within the same series, it plays nothing like other Marvel games, and I'd argue that they are all very different from each other. He continues, COTA allows you to super jump cancel your normal attacks on block, which no other Marvel game lets you do, for good reason. And the air control, drifting, lets you pick your position very carefully when landing towards the ground. Being essentially the first Capcom Versus series game means that COTA is unfortunately very raw when you look at it. Crazy canceling, infinites everywhere, throw resets, and other insane mechanics. But if you want to pick it up, be warned, it isn't some lost, competitively balanced gem from the 90s, but rather something that kind of finds its way because when everyone is insanely overpowered, no one is. Except for Silver Samurai. Dude needs some help. Send Lowe's, please. X-Men COTA may not have known it at the time, but it was laying the foundation for not only the Marvel Versus series, but Capcom's CPS2 legacy as well. Going back and revisiting this game and talking with the COTA community was a real treat, and if you like the newer Marvel offerings, or even if you're just an X-Men fan, it's totally worth it to go back and check out this gem of a game. And if you manage to beat the game's evil 90s Capcom AI and still want more, the competitive community is waiting for your challenge. And after you get done being thrown to death, they'll show you a thing or two about a game that they hold dear. I'll leave you with a quote from COTA Discord user Red Soda Pop, who told me, "I hate COTA. It's awesome."